Hi, and welcome to Education Roundtable. My name is Larry Petricaro, and I'm here with 4 guests this evening. We have Roderick White, Thelma Ramsey, Dorian Zimmerman, and Walter Fields. Now, all of these are people who have a deep interest in the district and in the education of its children, and they've all had children either in the district or have gone through the district. And what we want to talk about tonight is the incident that probably many of you have heard about that has gotten us, whether it's good or bad, but has gotten us press internationally, and that has to do with basically it has to do with the issue of race in this community and the issue of race in this country. There was an assignment, part of the curriculum, and I don't know if it was just part of the curriculum as a history lesson or part of the curriculum because it was Black History Month, but it had to deal with slavery, and some of the students were asked to have a slave auction, or they were asked to draw up posters that were related to slavery, wanted posters for fugitive slaves, for example. And this issue has caused a great deal of comment in the community, and also a great deal of comment, not just nationwide, but internationally. So I thought, and we thought, that it would be sensible to try to understand what the issue is. So I'll tell you what I think it is, and then I'm going to ask each of our guests to kind of let us know how they see it, why it's important, and how they feel about it. So the issue as it's been presented to me, or as I've garnered it, and probably for many of you it might be something that you're not as familiar with, maybe only as familiar with as I am, was just what I said, that as part of the curriculum, a number of students were asked to participate in the concept of slavery by one of the elementary or middle schools drawing a slave poster, or a poster for a fugitive slave, I guess. They were supposedly given several choices, and the ones that picked this is what they picked. The posters were hung up around the school. And later on in one of the schools, there was a slave auction where one of the students was actually, as I'm told, auctioned off in an example of a slave auction. So those are the facts. And I can't tell you if they're alternative facts or real facts, but those are the facts as I understand it. So now let me start with Roderick. And Roderick, what do you understand the issues were, and what do you to be, and why it's important to you, and so forth?
So what I understand the issues are is to expand on what you said. There is an assignment that is given out to the 5th grade class, and across a couple of schools in the district, where they were supposed to be studying the colonial period with slavery. And during this period of time, they were asked to draw, a few different things, and one of them was, slave posters of slaves who were for sale. And I think that me being a product of this school district, going 12 kindergarten through 12th grade, and have graduated a son from the school district, and currently have a 4th grader in the school district. It's concerning to me, because there are some racial insensitivities that are going on, the way that the lesson was disseminated to the kids. And when you walk through the school and you're seeing auctioned slave posters that kids of all colors have created, and there's somewhat of a racial divide that is created, especially at the 5th grade level. I don't think that the mind is at that point, fully enabled to understand the racial divides that this country has been through. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's important, because I want to make sure that, as an African American, father in the school district, because there have been some challenges throughout the years, as even when I came up, and with racial insensitivity, that I think that it's important that we can continue to drive and address. It's sad that we've got to the point where it is now, become not just a local level, but to a national and international level, where people are coming in and commenting, and we've dealt with these things many times before throughout the years, and we have not been able to, move past, this step, this stone that we are stuck at here in our community. So, I want to make sure that, my voice is heard, and I hear the voices of other people who are concerned, because I've been in this community since 1976.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thelma?
I have to agree with Roderick. I think that it was not an age-appropriate assignment for students, and it lacked context and content in terms of the depth of the assignment. It seemed to be very one-dimensional in terms of when we saw the rubric or whatever the project that the students were supposed to be doing, it did not give a lot of detail in terms of, so what were the students supposed to get out of doing a slave auction? So we did the auction, now what? Or we did the posters, and now what? And for fifth graders, that the concept and the topic of slavery is a very difficult one to grapple with in terms of all of the nuances of slavery, because it wasn't just about slaves being beaten and slaves being sold. It was about economics. It was about a lot of things. So to minimize it to the posters and the auction, it just made it a difficult thing to grapple with in terms of being an African American and thinking that your child could have been part of this without context and without any real thought given to it. So it was disturbing for me to hear as a mother of a African American male and as an educator, because I'm an educator as well. So just to hear it, regardless of was the poster wherever it was, the story has kind of taken legs at this point, but even just to think that that was an assignment that students had to be a part of was disturbing for me.
Dorian?
Well, to me, it's a relatively new issue. I wasn't that familiar with it up until recently, and from what I understand, I could see it as part of I'm also an educator, and I teach very young kids, but I'm familiar with sort of more project-based progressive models of education. And my children went for a short period in the middle of their schooling. They mostly went through Maplewood schools, but they went for a short period to a progressive school, and in that school, one of my sons was in 4th and 5th grade studying colonialism, and it was a very in-depth, full year, September through June, talking about, all various parts of colonialism, and talking about slavery in the context of the full economy and what was going on and all of that. I don't think they ever did these kinds of projects particularly, but in the context of that kind of depth, I do think 10 and 11-year-olds can understand it when it's part of a full picture and a full presentation that they are studying in depth for an extended period of time. But in that case, I would think it wouldn't be coming at parents as a flash. Here's this, one individual thing. They'd know their kids were talking about this for months. It wouldn't be, and the nuances of it and the ramifications for the people, and not just the eye-catching activities. Somebody was beaten, somebody was sold, but what it meant and how it affected the people involved and how it related to the economy and how it was part of the whole system and, where it fit into everything would be part of a dialogue the kids would be part of for, many months. And in that context, I could see it might not have been as disturbing, or I might not have thought it was, but I may not be sensitive to that because I'm not coming from that background, and I want to be very cautious about that. So it isn't surprising to me that there might be a lack of sensitivity about how to handle issues. Because I saw that from the other side, in many, many situations, so.
Walter?
Well, I think we have to separate issues because the assignment was an assignment that was given in class to fifth graders. The issue of the video was something totally separate because that was independently produced by students, but they're connected. So you had an assignment that was certainly worthy of discussion. I think the issue is not whether or not the period should be taught,
Right.
colonial American history, but how it's taught.
That was tough.
So you have fifth graders who were given an assignment to draw posters depicting slave auctions, a very important aspect of slavery. But if that lesson is given outside of the context of the entire issue around the enslavement of Africans, because you can't talk about colonial history without talking about colonialism. So if these students aren't aware of the larger picture, the assignment just becomes a poster drawing with no context and no understanding, and that's the problem. Now, the problem with the video is that because there's no context, students take it upon themselves to try to teach themselves a period of history of which they are unaware. So they tragically fall into the trap of saying, oh, we're talking about slave auctions. Let's create a video of a slave auction without understanding the depth of what a slave auction really was. And this is problematic because it shows that our curriculum is out of sync with what should be taught in a public school in 2017. This state has a mandated African American history curriculum, one of the few states in the nation that has a mandated Black history curriculum. We have never fully implemented that curriculum. In fact, we've never implemented that curriculum. So we're trying to teach a subject in which we have some guidance from the state on how it should be taught. Most people in the United States fail to realize that our role in slavery was actually minimal. If you really want to talk about slavery, you got to go to South America, Brazil, Caribbean, because that's where most of the enslaved Africans ended up. But our history is still important in that context. So the problem is that we're teaching children the wrong story. They will never be able to understand slavery if it's from the context of drawing posters about slave auctions, because that's not really the story of the enslavement of Africans. That's just a product of the enslavement of Africans, unless you tell the whole story in its full context. And as the descendant of a slave, a great-grandfather who was a slave, who was a Union soldier army in the Civil War, there is some sensitivity to how this subject is taught. And one of the reasons why we continue to have issues around race and racism in America is because we can't get the story right. Like, we can't tell the truth. And now we're expecting fifth graders, who have to raise their hands to have permission to go to the boys and girls room, to be intelligent enough at that age to draw a poster and really understand the meaning behind the images that they draw.
We're going to have to take a break for a minute, and when we come back, I'd like to continue along this line. I made a couple of notes, and there's a couple of things that seem to come out universally among the four of you. So if you'll stay with us, this is Larry Petricaro with Education Roundtable. We'll be back in a minute.
I call you and say, I'm with the IRS. You owe back taxes, and if you don't pay today, you're going to jail. You can fix this by sending cash. Did you actually believe me? Too smart to fall for it? Well, last year, Americans paid $100 million to guys like me. 1 in 6 people were scammed. Can you believe it? Well, you shouldn't. I just made that up, too. You are a little gullible.
Hi, and welcome back. This is Larry Petricaro again, and we're here with Education Roundtable. And I have with me Roderick White, Thelma Ramsey, Dorian Zimmerman, and Walter Fields. And if you saw the first half of the show, you got the opinions. I guess perhaps more than opinions, but you got the feelings that each of our guests had, and I started off with a brief, very trivial explanation, if you will, of what I understood it to be. And as we talked, there was a couple of items, a couple of issues that I seemed to make note of that I thought were perhaps common in all cases. And the one that really comes out is context, and it was looked at in a couple of ways. In one case, I think, it was the amount of time spent in preparation for this particular activity. In another case, it was the global aspect of the fact that, if you will, slavery was a big business, you know, and I mean, you look at big businesses today, and big businesses have a, you know, they're like any organisms, right? Survival is kind of, you know, the prime motivator for any business. So let's talk a little bit about context, if we will. Could one of you give me an idea of how you think the context could have been presented and how that would have made this particular assignment less trivial than it was? Because one of you mentioned it became just drawing a poster kind of thing, and that isn't, I think, what any of you would have intended. There is an issue of sensitivity, which you all mentioned, and obviously I have to confess, not being an African American, it's probably difficult for me to be as sensitive as you are, but that doesn't mean that I can't at least intellectually appreciate it. Maybe I can't appreciate it emotionally the way some of you can. So context, let me throw that out. Well, what can you tell me about how you think that should be done?
Well, look, I think it begins with having a curriculum that is very holistic, and you have to start in the earlier ages. So you can't expect to do this lesson in 5th grade if you haven't had a curriculum that preceded that allowed you, by the time you were a 5th grader, to really understand at this level what this colonial period really meant, right? So, you know, one of the things I've told people often is that one of the easiest ways to begin to have some context around enslaved Africans is replacing every map in the school, because every map is incorrect in terms of the geographic size of Africa.
Yeah.
All right, because that is a political statement when maps are drawn. So we don't even understand the breadth of this continent. In fact, most children think Africa is a country. But they don't realize that you could fit China, Russia, the United States, 48, inside Africa, India, inside. That's how huge Africa is. So part of it is understanding and reevaluating how we approach the African continent. And that starts in an early age. So I think that's why it's important to use the guidelines of the Amistad curriculum, because they have guidelines on how this should be taught.
The Amistad curriculum is
It's mandated by the state of New Jersey.
It's on the
And
state website.
It's state
free.
website.
It's free.
So part of the problem is that if you have a school district that's making it up as they go, you're going to get these grave errors in how a subject is taught. We don't have to make it up as we go. You know, part of the benefit of living in South Orange and Maplewood is we have access to universities, we have access to a statewide curriculum. There's no reason why we should get this wrong, except if we don't have the will to get it right. And I think that's part of the problem here. Like, I think that we just don't have the will to get it right on this issue, as well as a number of issues, because it's not, excuse the expression, rocket science. Like, there is a truth about this period in American history that's very easy to distill in a curriculum if we want to. And I think it's a tragedy that our children are subjected to this, when if they are taught properly, they can gain a lot out of these lessons. Our children are walking into a world that looks more like Africa than it does the United States. So what are we teaching our children when we get this wrong?
Anybody else want to add to that?
Well, I think it also leads into, you know, the curriculum, but having some transparencies with the parents that have students in the districts, because
You say transparency.
from
Visibility.
Yes.
the Board of Education, from the teachers, and sending curriculum home, that students and parents have the opportunity to understand together what they're going to be learning over the course of the year. You know, that's not something that is readily available for parents on a day-to-day basis or quarterly basis or the half annual basis. You know, that's something that kind of eats at me, because when I have, a child that I've graduated from the district, I've got a child who's in the district, and then, we're kind of blindsided by, some of the things that go on, especially with learning about this curriculum, and my daughter being a part of, the school that actually produced a video of doing a slave auction. That's concerning to me, because we should be able to not only just entrust we're sending our children to school every day to learn, but also the school sharing back with us, what they're going to be learning and how they're going to be, teaching them, these various different lessons. As Mr. Fields said, there is a state mandated curriculum for us in this specifically, but we've fallen by the wayside in terms of how we put together this information and make sure that students are learning it with all the full context that it should come with, as opposed to bits and pieces where they're not really grasping what the full ramifications of this whole colonial period embodies.
Now, that brings up an interesting question. I don't know if the SOMAtv curriculum centers specifically or mostly on the colonial period.
No, it starts from Africa. It starts all the way back to the beginning of civilization.
Okay, because
And it's
I
a
was
K through 12 curriculum. So
Okay.
it even goes back. And that is the other thing about it, is that when we think of slavery, most of us in this country think of just about slavery in the United States. We
Right.
don't think about that other countries had slavery. Africa, yes, slavery was even started in Egypt,
Right.
in those areas, and during that period of time. So this curriculum covers all the way back to BC.
Is it like racially pure, so to speak? I mean, does it, because I think in this country, we always tend to think of slavery as being a black experience, an African-American experience, whereas, I mean, slavery from an historical context, I think,
Yes.
is not just a black experience.
It's not just a black experience. No, it's not.
But the importance here
Right.
is that the transatlantic slave trade was racialized, and it was
Right.
racialized for a purpose. And that's what's missing in all of this. So part of the reason why it's important to talk about the transatlantic slave trade is because this country's economy was built on
Built
it.
on the transatlantic.
We would not be the country we are today had it not been for slavery. Slavery produced the labor that produced great wealth for this country. And that's what's always missed in the conversation. And slavery wasn't just confined to southern states. New Jersey was the last northern state to abolish slavery in the
really?
country. And so slavery was also prominent in the state of New Jersey. So part of the reason why it's important to talk about the transatlantic slave trade, albeit there has been slavery, is that period directly impacts the development of this nation and continues to impact our country today. So when we don't sell it right, we run the risk of perpetuating a lie. Because the lie is that, number one, slavery wasn't as bad as it's made out to be. It was a horrendous, brutal, violent crime of human kidnapping, where Africans were brought here and their labor was used. They were brutalized and tortured. And even after the abolishment of slavery, this country still put in place policies to perpetuate that practice by another name. So you had the Black Codes, and then you had Jim Crow. If we're not teaching that true history, then we're lying to children.
Okay, well, that brings up another really, I think, salient and important point is what you said, basically truth. I mean, it's not, and at what point what's the right word, are kids able to accept the truth of slavery, the horror of it, if you will, and yet not have it impact their ability to live in this world that we have to live in? I think you mentioned, Walter, that, and I don't know if you meant it just for this local area, but certainly the kids that we graduate and move out into the world are moving into a much more diverse world, okay? And I think one of the disadvantages you can have if you're, now I'm opinionating it, you're opining, I guess, is well, I think one of the strengths, whether it works or not, is the variety of people, is diversity. So you said something that makes sense to me, that regardless of the extent of slavery, and regardless of the fact that I might say, well, hey, I'm a white guy, my parents were Italian, Romans had slaves. The point is that it's the colonial slavery period. It's the business of slavery and it's I guess the brutalization of the people for profit, if you will. Like, to your point, I remember reading an article that South Carolina wanted slaves from a particular part of Africa because they had rice plantations. It was like, it even got specialized.
commerce.
It was commerce.
It was commerce.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are you thinking that perhaps you have to look at slavery in that overall context of universality, as long as you said, Thelma, from the time civilization started, but then begin to concentrate it on the colonial period, because that's what's brought us to today, and that's what's brought us the issues that we're trying to deal with. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do. I think you have to deal with it in the context of our national narrative, right? Our national
I would
narrative
agree.
is based upon a country that used slavery to enrich an elite class that created great wealth in this country on the backs of human beings who weren't treated as human beings. They were treated as machines. In our Constitution, they were 3/5 of a human being. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the reason why it's important to start at the early ages is because children can learn, so that if you're teaching them the right way at an early age, by the time they get to 5th grade, some lights will start going off in their minds, like, something, this was an abuse of human beings. Like, this was a terrible occurrence in our history. Because if you don't do that, you run the risk of not only minimalizing but trivializing it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think our teachers also have to have some more training, because I don't think the teachers, and I can speak not just of teachers here, teachers probably everywhere, may not have the tools to have tackled this topic. So that's what created the minimal assignment or the lack of depth in the assignment in the first place, is because the teacher's understanding of it might be very myopic or very narrow. So that definitely has to be, because it's one thing to have a curriculum, and then it's another thing to know how to implement that curriculum, or to know what tools you need or resources you need to teach that curreleum, because curriculum is just a guide.
It's just a guide.
And
So-
the heart behind the
And the heart
curriculum.
behind the curriculum.
Yeah.
So if I'm a elementary school teacher that teaches 5 subjects, and the concentration is English and math for most of the day, am I going to spend that much time on social studies to try to get in depth into slavery, or am I going to look at the chapter that's in the book, pull some things out of the chapter and say, okay, students, your project is this? So that's the other thing that we have to look at here. Yes, our students probably can handle it, but are the teachers equipped to give it to them?
Okay, well, I do think, and we're almost out of time, but I'm going to say one thing. I do think sometimes we tend to not give children credit for their ability to think,
Absolutely.
to
Right.
rationalize, to understand, and empathize. And with that, I'm not going to give you the ability to say anything more, because we're out of time, and we have to say goodnight. So thank you for joining us on Education Roundtable. This has been Larry Petricaro, and I've been here with Roderick White, Thelma Ramsey, Dorian Zimmerman, and Walter Fields. Thanks, and join us again.